Hello everyone, Oregon Moto John here. We're going to do an oil change on this 22 FE 350S. It'll be very similar on a regular FE 350 or a KTM 350. This happens to be a Husqvarna FE 350S. So the first step is going to be to remove these two bolts up here that hold on the skid plate. So let's do that first. Those come out pretty easy. You can just use an 8mm socket, or you can use a Torx bit. This is a T30, so you can use either one. So now that those are out, we'll just get this skid plate pulled down. You don't have to remove it all the way. If you have the stock skid plate, you can pull it off easily, but this one I'm just going to pull it forward and drop it down. And now you can see with this skid plate out of the way, I can easily get to my oil filter. I can access this where the screen is. I can also access this 13mm back there, which is the drain plug with a magnet. And this will come out because that's your screen, and then your actual paper element. It doesn't hurt to warm up the bike a little bit first, but certainly you'll get plenty of oil out of it if you just change it the way, just even cool. But it doesn't hurt to start it up, let it warm up to operating temperature. Just don't burn yourself when you're messing around with the exhaust. I washed the bike before I got started, so that's important. So here we have the 13mm drain plug. It's a magnetic drain plug. We're just going to take that up, loosen that up now, and then I can just take that out with my fingers. And that's 13mm. I am using a 6-point end wrench on this so that it doesn't round off that plug. Likewise, I'll do my best to find a 6-point socket for that, since this is aluminum and other softer materials. So I'll pull this drain plug out now. It has a magnet on it. We'll clean that with some contact cleaner, and there'll be a copper washer on there that we'll be replacing as well on the reinstall. But let's pull that out so the oil can start to drain. Okay, there it is. You can see the oil's coming out. Looks actually pretty good. And we're just going to let that drain. And what came out was this oil plug. It's a 13mm, has a copper washer that we'll replace. And there's the magnet. We'll want to clean that with some contact cleaner before we reinstall. While that's going on, let's pull the screen out. This is a 13mm. We'll use a long deep well socket for that. And we'll clean that with contact cleaner, both the plug and the screen that we're going to pull out here, and then we'll change out the paper element. So here we have our 6-point, just obviously being 6 points there, so we don't round this off. 6-point socket on here, and then we're just going to break that loose. And we'll go ahead and remove that. And there'll be a little screen that'll come out with it. So have a paper towel nearby so that you can set it on there so that it stays clean. So in this instance, the screen didn't come out. You could grab some needle nose and grab the edge of this, or I have these pliers that kind of are reversible. So I'm just going to go in there and kind of grab that, and it comes right out. And here's what that screen looks like. We'll be cleaning that and reusing that before we put it back in. So set that on your clean paper towel. Okay. And now notice these can both drain. So we're going to let those drain. I think I'm going to clean these next, the plug and this screen, with some contact cleaner, and then blow them out with some compressed air. So go ahead and do that now. Here's the copper washer that came off the plug. Be sure that comes off off this drain plug. Okay, you want to be sure that you have that. We want to replace this copper washer. You can get those on Amazon or various places, and pick up a bunch of them, because you're going to need to change those when you change the oil. I've had this plug in and out about 10 times, and I'm going to replace it today. It screwed out fine, but it doesn't hurt these threads. You know, it's aluminum. It doesn't hurt to replace this plug every now and then. You don't need to do this every time, but you know, maybe every 6 to 10 times it doesn't hurt to throw a new plug in. I cleaned these off with some contact cleaner. I just use some Maxima contact cleaner, but there's many kinds that'll work just fine. Anything that'll dry and not leave a residue will work. Have a new copper washer here for the plug. Make sure the old copper washer came off so you're not going to double washer that. Inspect your O-rings, make sure they're okay. Inspect your O-rings on this. These were fine. And I have some extra O-rings here. These green ones go up here. So let's, while this continues to drain, I just like to let this all drain because I have to clean all this stuff anyway. So we might as well pull this filter out now, and we're just obviously going to remove these two little Torx bits, Torx 30 or 8 millimeters, whichever you want to use. Let's take those out. I tend to use hand tools with these little Torx bits so I don't over tighten things. It's just so easy to over tighten these, and we're working with in many cases aluminum, and so you just don't want to strip this stuff out. Kind of a little tip on this is when you get this one out, if you have any trouble getting this cover off, you can use the screw. So let's say I can't, say I'm having a little trouble, you can put the screw in here and just kind of gently tweak it to the side, and there it goes. Okay, so I got that off. Of course, then it fell down there in my dirty skid plate, so that can happen. So we'll make sure we clean that thoroughly before we put it back on so we don't contaminate the motor. But with both hands, that wouldn't have happened. With one hand, though, it sure can. And then I'm going to use this little expander tool again. You could just, and then pull. You could easily use, punch a screwdriver in there in the center of this thing and pull it out. I wouldn't pry around the edges because you could damage the aluminum where the O-ring goes. So we'll just go ahead and pull that filter out. Okay, good. We'll just set that aside for now. Set that down there in the drain pan. Okay, now we're going to let that all drain. And since that was draining, well, that's drained, I'm going to go ahead and put these in. They're all clean and dry. So I wiped around in there with a paper towel just to make sure all these surfaces are clean. You can put a little contact cleaner on that rag if you want to. I also, cleaned this thoroughly. I've inspected this O-ring to make sure it looks good. It doesn't hurt to replace that every so often if it, looks like it needs it, but it looks good right now, so I'm going to leave it. Okay, the next thing is I'm going to use some just all-purpose grease. You could use anything. This just happens to be Maxima. And I'm going to put grease around this washer, both surfaces. I'm going to put grease up around this sealing surface up here, not on the magnet, not where it's going into the motor, just a little bit on the threads and into here. We have disc-like metals, and we don't want those. Anytime you have metal-to-metal contact, sometimes they can want to get a little sticky. So that being said, we're going to put grease on all these surfaces, and I'm going to put a little grease on this one, actually, on these threads and around this O-ring here, not where it's going to be up in the motor. I'm going to put oil on this O-ring and this O-ring. I'm talking motor oil. And then we're going to get those things back in here. I've wiped around both of these to clean both these surfaces. And then we're going to put the filter in there. Now, you're supposed to tip the bike on its side, fill it up 1/3 of the way, which I've done that countless times. And now, had some other reputable mechanics say that what they do is they have some filters in standby. And this is a peanut butter container that I cleaned thoroughly when it was done. And you can see these filters are been soaking in oil. They've been there for months. So I'm going to pull one out, and fill it with a little oil and pop it in. And that's what I do. I don't like tipping the bike on its side. But if, like I said, the manual says to do that, I've done that. It's not a big deal. I just don't feel like it's necessary for me. But the manual says to do it. If you don't mind doing it, I would do it. So let's move on to getting grease on these surfaces, those I described, and getting this ready for oil. Okay, you can see I've got lots of grease on all the surfaces of this. Now we're going to put it back where it came from, right up there. Don't cross thread it, do it by hand always. Okay, here I am torquing this down, tightening this just snug. I'm not using a lot of muscle on here. I'm not even really yanking on this. It's got a copper washer. Doesn't have to be crazy tight. I don't think I could get my torque wrench up in here. So look, I'm just using fingers. And when it stops, bottoms out, that's it. It's compressed out copper washer. So that's enough. Okay, now I'm going to take this screen. I put a little oil on each O-ring at each end, and I'm just going to take this up in here, straight ahead, and you'll feel it seat in, and you can just push it in with your finger, and there it's seated in. And then when I screw this in, I'm going to put grease around this O-ring, and then when we screw it in, we'll make sure that that centers up in this right here. Okay, so as we mentioned, I put some grease around that O-ring and those threads on the back end here. And we're just gonna make sure it gets centered up with this screen before I put it in. There, I've kind of captured that plastic screen, and then I'm gonna screw this in by hand. Always by hand. Get that started, and then once we get that threaded in, it should go in easy. If it's not going in easy, see, that's going in really easy. You didn't capture that screen right. I'm just using this because it's kind of slippery because of the grease, and we'll screw that in by hand and then lightly snug it with a ratchet. Okay, we don't want this tight, so I'm going to choke up on this ratchet like this when I tighten it, so I don't get this too tight. I'm just doing it right up there like that, and there it is. It's tight, and it's bottomed out. That's it. That's all that gets. Don't yank on that. That's aluminum going into aluminum. Different motorcycles, they use magnesium, aluminum, different things, and they're all soft metals, so I've never tightened any of those things down tight. They've never come loose. Now there's a torque setting on that. You could certainly use it. You could look it up in your manual, but there's an O-ring on there. It doesn't need to be crazy tight. Okay, let's go ahead and put a filter in. Here's the KTM oil filter part number. There may be one that supersedes this, but I bought a bunch of it once so I could submerge them in the oil. 77338005100. And then I was talking about the castor oil that I'm thinking about switching to. It's Castrol. See, it's got the right certification there. It's a 1050 weight oil, 4T, wet clutch safe. So I'm going to try that out. You guys chime in if you've had good luck with it, but it's significantly cheaper than the Motor X. Motor X is good oil. I just feel like it's very expensive. Again, these bikes, so it's a quart of oil. If that's what we need to put in there, fine. But sometimes you wonder if there's another option that's just as good. So here I am filling this with oil. Rubber grommet goes in towards the motor. Here we go. In it goes. Line that up. Bottom it out. End cap on. There we go. Put that on and seal it up. I like to twist this back and forth a little bit to get that O-ring to seat in so it's not just getting smashed in there. There. And then we'll put our screws in, just lightly snug with hand tools, not overly tight. And start these by hand. Do not use tools. If you strip this out in your motor, you will have a very bad day. You can use hand tools to snug these, but don't use hand tools to start them. And go to one. Go to the other. I'll go back to the other one. Just lightly snugging that down. That's all I'm doing. That's it. Okay. Good. I feel pretty comfortable with taking the oil filter out of here that's full of oil, popping it in, and putting it in, I feel comfortable that, you know, that oil gallery isn't going to collapse or take very long to fill, since the oil filter is largely filled full of oil and the media is also pre-saturated with oil, which I think is one of the main reasons to fill that gallery with oil before you put the filter in. So we have screen in, plug in, filter in. Now I'm going to take some contact cleaner and lightly spray around here just to clean off some of this oily mess that I have that happened. And I'll take a rag to that as well. And then we'll go ahead and add the oil. Just a word on oil changes. I like to keep my oil changed fairly frequently, every 5 to 10 hours, sometimes a little more if I was mainly on trails. The fan kicking on a lot, lots of clutch working the clutch. I might change it, you know, every 3 to 5 hours, but generally, you know, somewhere in that range. So where I'm going with all this is, since I do oil changes so frequently, the KTM spec is roughly 10 hours for filter change, screen clean, and oil drain. So every other oil change, I just pull this plug here, let the oil puke out. You could clean the screen in here if you wanted to while you're down there, but I just let the oil pour out. I leave the filter, not more than 10 hours ever, so I'm not breaking KTM's recommendation. It's 1 quart of oil. I just put the plug, you know, maybe change the washer, put the plug back in, and refill to the spec level and the sight glass. And that seems to have always worked well for me. I've done that on like my sand bike, dune bike that I run, a Honda 450R, oil change like that, oil dump one time, and then getting the filter the next. Now, again, I don't want you guys to misunderstand me. I'm doing this, I'm staying within KTM spec. The filter is always changed at 10 hours or before. So I'm not running outside of that. What I'm actually doing is you're giving it more frequent oil changes. Again, it's kind of going above and beyond, but I've found that valves tend to stay in spec for me better this way. It shifts better. Anyway, I just think your motor will last longer if you do that. So, but it's up to you. You can do what you want. You can wait till every 10 hours and then just do this procedure like I'm showing you here. I have this Akrapovic header guard on here. This worked awesome. That was one of my first upgrades of mods, and I'm going to do a mod video on this bike soon. Seems to be working perfect, so I want to share that with you guys. So once you do that, you can't get the stock plug on and off anymore, the oil plug, out very easily without loosening this up every time. So, but this was essential, so I didn't sacrifice a pair of pants every time I rode practically. So got this Takomoto thing here. It's gnarled here on the edges, so you can easily get a hold of it. This is the best. Look at that. Slips out from underneath a really low profile. It's got the knurled edges, and I'm not sponsored by Takomoto. They just have good stuff that I found works well. So we'll take this out, set aside somewhere clean. We're going to take a clean rag and wipe around here from the inside out. And then I have this Flow Tool funnel that works well. It's long and skinny, and it kind of fits up in here in a way that lets me get oil in there. So we're going to put roughly a quart of oil in there. I'm using the recommended Motorex Cross Power 4T 1050 weight, which is what's recommended by KTM. I think there's other good oils you could use. This is one of the last quarts of this that I have. But I have Castrol motorcycle oil that's a 1050 weight, and it's 4T, made for motorcycles, has the same, meets the JASO MA2 standard, so I'm going to be using that, I think, in the future, but for right now, this is what I have. Another benefit of this is when you put this oil plug back in, fill plug in, you can, you don't need tools. If you're on the trail and need to add oil, you could, make a funnel out of paper or something, and you can fill that. I don't need a tool to get this off, and it's not coming out. I've never had it loose in all the hours I've put on this bike. So when I do a filter change, paper cartridge, and clean screen and magnet cleaning, I put 1 quart in. It's always been perfect. The bike hasn't been started, so I'll start the bike. If it's cold, you want it kind of on the more of the bottom edge of this fill glass. If it's warm, it should be in the middle of the circle, roughly. After sitting for a minute with the bike level, is what KTM says. But when I dump the whole system, it seems like 1 quart is perfect. So I've done it enough. That's what I'm doing. But if I were to just do an oil dump, I'd probably put in like 3/4 of a quart, and then, you know, start the bike for a moment, just a minute, then turn it off, and then I would recheck my oil in the sight glass to see how I was doing. I wouldn't be so confident of the oil fill level. It's actually slightly less than a quart when you don't drain the oil gallery for the paper filter. So there you have it. Now we'll just you know, pop this back on the other side of this header and put our other 2 little screws in here. Start those by hand because they go into your frame, and then those don't take a lot of torque either. I just use a light torque spit hand tool to tighten those into the frame, and there you have it. Record your mileage of your oil change, and if you do that, I believe you'll get lots of mileage out of this bike. Stay tuned. I'm going to do a mods video of all the different mods that I've done. Bike's running really, really good, so plan on doing that in the near future. All right. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe. Hope these tips are helpful. And oil changing is probably one of the best things you can do to your bike. I mean, there's lots of good oils you can use. You know, you guys can chime in on what you're using, but there's lots of good oils. And I think ultimately, as long as you're using a oil that's in spec for a motorcycle, for this bike, you know, the right specs so it doesn't make your wet clutch slip, and it's the right weight oil for the temperatures you're running and everything, and you change it. I think the most, what I'm saying is change it. It only takes a quart of oil. You know, if you guys have, some of you guys I'm sure have adjusted your own valves, seen all the complexity of the timing chains and dual overhead cam. I mean, these motors are very high performance. There's a lot of performance out of a very small engine, so changing the oil is, in my opinion, and you have, of course, the transmission, all the gears, the crank bearings, crank rod and crank piston, valves. I mean, there is just a ton of stuff packed in here. And then when you ride, you get clutch material in here. One of the reasons when I do a lot of trails, I'll change it out, is you're working that clutch. So you don't want that stuff in your motor. You want it out of there. You don't want to run around your timing chain and up in there from your material from your clutch. Those change your oil so easy, so quick. 1 quart. What's coming too is I'm eventually going to change out the stock slave cylinder to a recluse slave cylinder, not a recluse clutch, but a recluse slave cylinder. On my 690, I had the KTM one go out. The recluse slave cylinder is superior in design. I'll talk more about that when we do that video, but more to come. I'm really impressed with the Dirt Tricks rear sprocket. Just put that on. That seems to be holding up really well, better than aluminum. All right, you guys, hope this helps. Have a great day. Keep riding, have fun, stay safe, keep the adventure going. So I ran the bike a little bit, shut it off at about a minute, and you can see it's right in the middle of the glass, so it can be at the lower end if it's cold, to the middle, and it's fine. You know, if you're in that glass somewhere, you're good. So we wouldn't want it grossly overfilled at the top there, but it looks great. So 1 quart seems to be about right with full filter change.